The Schmuckler. I spend a lot of my time these days thinking about the unthinkable thing that happened in our 2024 election. And so it's in that context I've been entertaining myself by watching a couple of Jason Bourne movies. And I see in them both what I've always really appreciated about these movies and also seeing how they may fit into some of the cultural evolution we've gone through that leads to the moment where a majority of American voters might vote for something like Trump and the Trump party. Really quite unthinkable. So it pays to take a look at all the things that might illuminate what went wrong and maybe how it could be set right, because you do not want a country where the majority of the citizens could possibly choose uh, an option which previous generations of Americans would have said was probably as repellent a political option as one could imagine on the presidential stage. In fact, I think that what Donald Trump has said and done, that everybody's in a position to know, should be beyond what anybody much could have imagined back in the age of Eisenhower or even Reagan. But here we are with this unthinkable thing, and I'm watching. I'm watching Matt Damon play Jason Bourne in this compellingly directed and filmed. Uh, is Why wouldn't I get a lot of pleasure out of identifying with a guy who's you know practically unbeaten in the ring? He's just superhuman in his competence. He knows everything. Somehow he seems to know his way around even the most complicated buildings he'd never been in. Uh, but he's always knows just what's coming, and he always has the resourcefulness to triumph over it. If not immediately, then ultimately. Yeah, he's a lot of fun. I do kind of wonder. I was thinking about doing something called Jason Bourne, the Master of Disguise, because he's this guy is hunted by the most powerful intelligence agency in the world, and he's making himself completely available for facial recognition technology, or just the people who are watching for him on the screen. No, it's really incredible. The extent to which he doesn't do anything to obscure himself. Well, once in the movie called Just Jason Bourne, he does put on a baseball cap to hide who he is, but he's always Matt Damon because he's got a nice face, I guess is why they do it. It, but the other thing is in that Jason Bourne movie, he gives away just to make it to stick it to the bad guy from the agency. He gives away where he is, that he's in the guy's office, and as a result, having to contend with another car chase that destroys 100 vehicles before he gets to where he's going. It's very exciting. I wouldn't mind fewer car crash things, but it's part of the genre, and I accept that. And nobody drives better than Jason Bourne. But the thing is, and this is true of a lot of other movies of our times, what we're identifying with is a guy who's completely on his own to decide what the rules are. And he's going up against the American government, basically. The government is out to kill him all the time, and they're the bad guys. And it's a rogue operation, or sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it's always putting us in the position where we're identifying with a lawless person who is up against the established order, the powers that be that are hostile. And the gratification is one man against all this stuff, and he prevails. And it's gratifying. But I was thinking, there are a lot of movies that have put us in that kind of position. An early one that I also like very much is 3 Days of the Condor, where Robert Redford uh, uh, kidnaps, what's her name, Bonnie and Clyde, Faye Dunaway, and lovely scenes. And basically, he's trying to survive, though some other rogue but major part of the American intelligence world is guilty of murder and is trying to kill him. And I kind of liked this stuff when it first started coming out. And it's not just up against the CIA. The corruption of the established order became more and more ingrained into the so that even the sheriff is not enforcing the law. He's just another form of fascism. Or maybe the Mission Impossible ones. And there's one I think called The Shooter, where our hero is framed for something, a corrupt part of the power. And so it's a continuous experience of one person having to survive in a state of war against the establishment in some form or another. And you combine that with what I think is true about, truer now than it was in previous generations, about what people are growing up with, which is a lack of civics, is one way of framing it. I think that there isn't a lot of knowledge imparted to American kids as they grow up that would help them know what their government is, for good and for bad. But there's a predominance, I would say, that the United States government has been, we'll see what happens now, has been a benign actor with its defects, but in comparison, say, with the corporate world, I think that the government has been, a lot of people who care about public service, putting in public service. That's my experience, having lived in the Washington Beltway, is that there really are devoted public servants in the civil service. They're doing good jobs and are devoted to making the system work for the country. That's my impression, is what's general. But if you don't know that, if you have no contact with that, if you're not taught in 7th, 8th, 9th, whatever grade, something about what the government's done, for good or for bad, the Tennessee Valley Authority establishing Social Security, some of the successes, some of the failures. If you don't have any knowledge about the government, but have all your experience having to do with the United States government being this guy who's at war with it and it being evil, well, I'm imagining that you can see how that imbalance between that particular enjoyable but not realistic fantasy, not that there aren't some conspiracies out there, but the world is not what you see in the Bourne movies. Not mostly, anyway. If you don't have any experience, and your main experience of the American government is in the form of vicious evildoers, then you could easily become enamored of a guy who goes to war against the deep state. What we're talking about here is the deep state, which is a fantasy. And it's a fantasy that has fed the prospects of fascism. And Jason Bourne movies and the others have fortified that fantasy as a force in people's consciousness. So I think a lot of people, young men in particular, who watch these movies, have an image of this. It's pretty easy for them to get into an image of the government as being something other than responsible, civil servants doing their duty. And that might come up if this Project 25 gets adopted much, because part of their plan is to take the civil service and flush it down the toilet and put in just loyalists or something to run the show. That'd be a great loss. But if the American people have been taught to think of them as the deep state and not to understand how the government has been in many ways an instrument of the people to make a more than usually decent society out of this, compared at least with the rest of the history of civilization. So I expect I will continue to enjoy the Jason Bourne things, but I think it might be useful to at least know that that's part of what we maybe have to address in the years to come, if we're able to maintain our ability to communicate freely, is to help so that the coming up generations of Americans have an understanding about the value of a democratic system to get governments that are not just of the people, but also for and by the people. And then they wouldn't support something like what we see being offered here in the form of a fascist dictator, and however far he's willing to take it. Matt Gaetz for Attorney General suggests there aren't any particularly evident limits. Okay, that's please subscribe, support, but especially if you're interested in the way I see the forces at work in the human world. I have something worthwhile for you to see on my website, www, or no, maybe there isn't even W, abetterstory.org. An integrated picture of the nature of the challenge that we face, and one that I think could have a benign effect on how things develop if we understand better what we're up against.